In this video, we're going to look at the manuscript question of the Bible. Has the Bible changed over the centuries? You know, a lot of skeptics or critics of the Bible say, well, some monks or some priests or religious people, they changed what the Bible actually said for their political advantage or to control the people or whatever. And listen, if that's the truth, I don't want to follow God. I'm not interested in Christianity. But if it's not the truth, then I do want to follow the Bible, because really what Christians believe is that the Bible is God's inspired word and that it's authoritative in our lives today. So if it was manipulated, or if it wasn't really written by God, or if it was somehow changed by people, then I'm out of here. And probably you feel the same way. So there are three manuscript evidences that help us to trust that what we have today is truly what God inspired the original authors to write, thousands of years ago. So here they are. Evidence number one, New Testament manuscript evidence in Greek. Okay, so the Bible was originally written in Greek, and we don't have any of those original copies. We don't have that for anything written that long ago. But what we do have are over 6,000 Greek copies or fragments of copies from the original documents. Now, this is important because a lot of works from back then, non-biblical works, but Greek, books or whatever that were written, a lot of that stuff, we have less than 100 copies. But for the Bible, for the New Testament, we have 6,000 copies. Now, the way this works is that there's a gap from the original writings to the time when we have the copies. And for a lot of Greek literature, that gap is 800 years, 1,000 years, or even more. But for the New Testament, some of those fragments, that gap is only 150 years. In fact, we can put together an entire New Testament, Greek New Testament, from the copies that we have from 250 years from the time it was originally written to the time that we have the copy. Now, that's incredible. Again, maybe for you today, that might not seem that incredible, but what we're doing is we're understanding that this is ancient literature, and what this does is this helps us first evidence to really give us confidence as Christians that what we have in the New Testament is better than any other Greek literature out there. Okay, here's manuscript evidence number two, and it's translations and citations of the New Testament. So we already covered the Greek, the Greek copies and the Greek manuscripts, but now if you think about all the translations, the New Testament was translated into other languages as well, and we've got 25,000 copies in other translations of that Greek New Testament. That's incredible. Again, unlike any other ancient Greek literature. And then we also have all these citations. Now, a citation is when one of the early church fathers in those first 250 years, when they cited the New Testament text. And we've got over 86,000 citations of the New Testament. Now, again, if you're not into this kind of stuff, the reason this is important is that this is all evidence, this is all manuscript evidence pointing us back to the idea, to the fact that the New Testament truly is reliable. All of these translations, all of these citations that point back to the original document, the original Greek New Testament, and all of it is consistent, and it helps us to understand that really this Bible, the New Testament, really is reliable, and we shouldn't have any question about whether we should trust that what we have today is reliable and is what was written originally 2,000 years ago. Okay, evidence number three is the Old Testament manuscripts. Now, so far we've only talked about the New Testament. The Old Testament is a lot older, obviously, and yet we have hundreds of manuscripts from the Old Testament. This wasn't in Greek, this was in other languages, but these manuscripts point to the fact that what we have is truly reliable. The Jewish scribes back then, they had complex systems to make sure that what they wrote and what they passed on to future generations was accurate. I mean, they would really pay attention, a lot more attention than you and I would pay today when we're writing something down or copying something down. This was a big deal. This was a full-time job for them, and that's evidenced for us when we compare what we have in the Old Testament with the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the 1940s and 1950s. So we found some scrolls, some ancient scrolls that were incredibly preserved, and so many critics thought, when we open up these scrolls, we're going to see how much the people, the translators, the modern translators have changed what was originally written in the Old Testament. And we're going to see how much manipulation there has been and all that kind of stuff. But what happened is when they started to open those scrolls, they compared it with what we have, and it was completely accurate, incredibly accurate. Further proof that we can trust that what we have today is what God meant for us to have, and it's what he wrote in the first place. Bottom line is the Bible hasn't been corrupted. This manuscript evidence, and you can check out some of the archaeological evidence in the resources below, but all of this evidence, as we pile it up, we realize what we have today is from God. God has preserved it. We can trust it. We don't have to worry about whether there are missing books or whether the message has been changed. What you have in the Bible today is authoritative for you, so start reading it, trusting it, allowing it to guide your life. Now use the resources below to talk about this with your small group, with your family, or with your mentor.